This is being written a few short hours after my departure from the hell on earth that was Peekskill, New York, this Sunday before Labor Day, 1949. I still hear the frenzied roar of crowds, the patter of stone against glass and flesh. I hear the wails of women, the impassioned screams of children, the jeers and taunts of wild-eyed youths. I still smell the sickening odor of blood flowing from freshly opened wounds, gasoline fumes from autos and buses valiantly trying to carry their loads of human targets out of the range of bricks, bottles, stones, sticks. I still feel the violence, the chaos which permeated the air. I still hear, smell, and feel Peekskill.
Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? He delivered Daniel from the lion's den, Jonah from the belly of the whale, and the Hebrew children from the fiery furnace, and why not every man? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? The moon runs down in a purple stream, the sun refused to shine. Every star did disappear, yes, freedom shall be mine. Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man?
When Henry Hudson sailed up the river that would one day bear his name, his first mate would observe a bay formed by the river's curve, surrounded by mountains that look as if some metal or mineral were in them, and remark that the eastern shore would be a very pleasant place to build a town on. His assessment of the region would prove to be correct. 250 years later, the thriving village of Peekskill was the center of trade in the Hudson Highlands, with many iron mines and foundries pumping out hundreds of thousands of iron goods a year during the 19th century.
In simple terms, iron was the plastic of the day. The Industrial Revolution called for a much higher demand for iron than ever before. Iron was needed for railways, bridges, tunnels, stoves, tools, even window frames, and any area with an abundance of raw iron had the potential to be extremely profitable. Peekskill was fortunate to not only have access to a ready supply of iron in Westchester and Putnam counties, but its location as a river port allowed the local economy to prosper. This small town along the Hudson became the national center for iron stove manufacturing, and iron cooking became the village's leading business in the post-Civil War years.
But before the turn of the century, Peekskill would be faced with a devastating blow to its iron industry. the discovery of a cheaper source of iron ore in the Mesabi Range of Minnesota would make it impossible for the foundries and stove shops of the Hudson Valley to compete. The economy of Peekskill was hit hard, and it was a loss the region would never truly recover from.
Peekskill was, and in many cases still is, the lifeblood of many of its surrounding rural and suburban communities, such as Buchanan, Verplanck, Cortland, and Putnam Valley. The iron industry allowed these areas to flourish, but as the iron foundries of the Hudson Highlands began to fade away at the turn of the century, many blue-collar families wondered, how would they be able to support themselves? What would happen if they weren't able to find a new job with sufficient pay? Would they be replaced by cheaper labor new to the area? While unique circumstances drove Peekskill's economic decline, many white Americans throughout the United States shared these same fears, as African Americans were moving north and many Jewish and Catholic immigrants were coming to America. As is the case throughout history, it is within these anxieties that hatred finds a home.
D.W. Griffith's 1915 film, The Birth of a Nation, is a silent film depicting the end of the Civil War and the birth of the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction. Considered a cinematic masterpiece for its innovative filmmaking techniques, its genius and storytelling abilities makes it one of the most significant films in American history, and it has haunted the nation ever since. A reflection of the culture from which it spawned, Birth of a Nation twists the rules of historical fiction to portray the Confederacy as a lost cause, to be admired and empathized with, and the era of Reconstruction as a second rebellion against the tyrannical North. The plot depicts numerous racist depictions of African Americans who are portrayed as uncontrollable creatures who threaten white womanhood. Only the Klan can stand in the way to protect white Christian society from the monsters unleashed upon them by the North.
When the film was screened at the White House for President Woodrow Wilson, his reaction would capture the sentiment of millions of white Americans radicalized by the picture, when he said, "It is like writing history with lightning. My only regret is that it is true." Despite being historically inaccurate to the point of being fictitious, the film had its intended effect. 25 million people saw the film during its theatrical run. For half of them, it was the first motion picture they had ever seen. Despite protests from NAACP groups and black critics in the North, the film had many more supporters and admirers who quashed any criticism from what the film taught them was a lesser race. A sort of Ku Klux fever hit the North, with Klan hats, costumes, and other memorabilia sold to tens of thousands, making the white supremacist group that year's hottest trend.
The film's success would help spread the white supremacist group beyond the Deep South and into the North. Unlike the Klan of Reconstruction, this new Klan rebranded itself on the prospect of promoting and defending 100% Americanism to downplay its terroristic behavior. They also expanded their list of targets to further capitalize on the fears of ordinary white Americans, from just African Americans to also include Jews and Catholics, who made up a large number of immigrants in the northern cities. This rebranding and expansion effort worked. In less than 10 years, roughly 1 out of every 20 Americans was a member of the so-called Invisible Empire. Westchester County would become fertile ground for Klan activities with the influx of Catholic immigrants as well as Jews and blacks from the city. In the rural communities surrounding Peekskill, the Klan found many members and sympathizers. Many ordinary citizens were attracted to the fraternal structure of the organization, as well as the rhetoric of white supremacy. The Ku Klux Klan also made charitable donations to churches, hospitals, and those in need, such as a store owner from Putnam Valley whose store and home had burned to the ground. The manner in which these donations were delivered was a symbolic ritual unto its own. The affected store owner was a member of the Putnam Valley Grange, the local chapter of a national fraternal organization with many similarities to the Freemasons, but with a specific focus on farming and agriculture. During a general meeting of the Putnam Valley Grange, the doors suddenly opened for the arrival of 15 members of the Peekskill Clavern, donning their full regalia of hoods and robes. The Grange master ordered all the officers of the Grange to stand at attention, showing the usual formalities shown in receiving any uniformed organization. The Klansmen gave the Grange master an envelope containing a letter and $100 for the Grange member who had lost his home. As quickly as they had appeared, they were gone again. The master of the Grange read the letter aloud to the members and officers present.
Gentlemen, greetings. We have observed through many channels your splendid and commendable assistance given to a family in dire distress, wrought through a fire which caused a complete loss of their home, their furnishings, their clothing, their money, all of their earthly possessions. In recognition of your unquestioned Christian service, we respectfully request that you accept and apply the enclosed $100 to the fund in your charge raised on behalf of this family. It is the high resolve and the purpose of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan all over the United States of America to practically apply Christian administration in the alleviation of suffering humanity. Humanity embraces the Jew, the Negro, the Catholic, the Protestant, every human being, and it is for humanity's sake that the Ku Klux Klan was called into service. Our creed may differ from that of our adversary, or rather adversaries, yet we would remind that it was the Protestant Pilgrims who established this country, Master Masons who conducted the Boston Tea Party, Protestants and Masons who drafted and signed the Declaration of Independence, and finally brought into being the Constitution of the United States of America. We harbor no malice toward any individual, but simply stand as Minutemen, unshackled, ready to defend our Constitution, our flag, our homes, and every citizen from any encroachment by foreign prostitution.
This ritual would be repeated throughout the Hudson Valley, in whatever communal centers provided the opportunity to make their presence known, such as the local church. Sunday services throughout Westchester and Putnam counties could suddenly be interrupted by the arrival of that town's newly formed chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, in which a donation would be offered to the reverend. This act of charity served a dual purpose. In giving funds to the community, it formally established the Ku Klux Klan as a powerful and respected force in the region, hiding in plain sight. The acceptance of this gift would be viewed as an official approval of the Klan by a leader of the community. On some occasions, however, such as on one spring evening in Cold Spring, north of Peekskill, the pastor would decline the Klan's charity, stating he would not accept gifts from those who go about in disguise. More often than not, these spectacles would inspire local men to join the Klan, creating a network of like-minded individuals throughout the region. Once the Klan had established a firm presence in the Peekskill area, their focus turned to making their newfound strength known to those in the community whom they opposed. One such target was Israel Schreiber, a Jewish school board member from the city. He had established a summer camp in Putnam Valley for underprivileged children from New York's Lower East Side. Upon moving himself and his family to Putnam Valley, Mr. Schreiber would soon be treated with a twisted housewarming gift from the community.
After some remodeling and the erection of some additional accommodations for the campers, Camp Madison, then known as Camp Rossback, began to function, and for a time was known locally as the Jew Camp. One Saturday night, when the young campers were gathered at the barn singing camp songs and otherwise engaged in recreational activities, some shouting broke out from a few of the young people. It became apparent that a burning cross was on the hillside over the campgrounds. It was quickly put out with little damage to camp property.
Mr. Schreiber would later remark that the cross-burning left him with a definite impression that the community could benefit from the improvement of its educational facilities. This inspired him to take his experience in education and create the Putnam Valley Central School District. Cross-burnings were common throughout Westchester and Putnam counties, but this would not be the extent of their activities in the area.
Special to the New York Times, the Ku Klux Klan intervened to prevent an interracial marriage between Sidney Barrett of Mahopac and Miss Hazel Williams of Peekskill. The couple were surrounded by 20 Klansmen as they left the home of Mrs. Hattie Meade, town clerk of Kent. They received a threatening letter warning them that if they married, they could expect a warm reception and dire consequences from the Klan.
The 1920s provided the Klan with an opportunity to flex its power and large membership by holding huge rallies in Westchester. One such gathering, on a farm outside of Peekskill, had between 6,000 to 7,000 attendees, topped off with impressive band performances, amusements, and food offered to all, protected by Klansmen armed with baseball bats who guarded the perimeter. The annual rallies in Peekskill were reported to have an average crowd between 6,000 to 10,000, but the largest rally in Peekskill in 1925 reportedly had a crowd exceeding 25,000, according to conservative estimates from the Putnam County Courier. Cars arrived from Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Greater New York for what was reported to be the largest assembly of Klansmen ever held in that part of the state. Traffic was managed by Klansmen as well as New York State troopers. Thousands of men, women, and children enjoyed the festivities, which included music performed by the Westchester County Junior Order Band and bombs exploding in the sky, releasing 6 American flags, 20 feet in length, attached to parachutes, sailing against the brilliant colorings of the summer sunset. A baseball game was held between the Peekskill Klan and the New York State Klan, with the Peekskill Klan reportedly winning by a wide margin. The main purpose of this rally, however, was the dedication ceremony, in which 400 men, women, and children were naturalized into the Ku Klux Klan, the ladies of the Ku Klux Klan, and the Junior Ku Klux Klan, reserved for boys 12 to 18. 2 40-foot crosses were illuminated, as leaders of the National Organization of the KKK presided over the naturalization ceremony. Once they were complete, the evening concluded with fireworks, described as the most brilliant ever witnessed in Peekskill. The Klan certainly held a great deal of power in the 20s, but they also faced large opposition in Westchester, particularly from the Catholic communities whom they opposed. This would result in a serious clash between the two groups in 1928 during the presidential race that year. New York Governor Al Smith was running as a Democrat against Republican Herbert Hoover. Smith was the first Catholic nominee of a major party in American history. The Catholic population of Westchester, many of whom were immigrants who had struggled and fought for many years to survive in America, were proud to finally have a Catholic running for president. But in the end, he was defeated by Hoover. And while not the only reason, it's undeniable that the existing prejudice against Catholics and foreigners in America was a factor in Smith's defeat, and the Catholics of New York were especially devastated. To further antagonize the Catholic community, a caravan of 80 Klansmen drove into the hamlet of Verplank to celebrate the defeat of Al Smith. Having had enough of the harassment and mistreatment from the Klan and the greater culture of Protestant America that opposed them, the Catholic community of Verplank struck back.
Special to the New York Times, clothed in full regalia of their order and waving Hoover victory banners from their cars, about 80 members of the Ku Klux Klan made up an automobile parade that was scheduled to pass through the strongly anti-Klan territory of Verplank's Point. The paraders were met with sticks, stones, and bottles and eggs. According to F.W. Gamble, reputed to be one of the leaders of the Peekskill Clan Clavern, he was kicked and beaten. A rope was placed around his neck, though a plea made by some of the more thoughtful residents saved him from being hung, he said.
This night would become legendary in the tight Catholic community of Verplanck, marking the beginning of the end for the Klan's power in Westchester. While rallies were still held, membership began to dwindle due to similar incidents in the region. Other factors in the Klan's decline included various corruption scandals and the national Ku Klux Klan. Between 1925 and 1930, the Ku Klux Klan had an astonishing 99.5% decrease in membership, with only 30,000 members remaining during the Great Depression. In Westchester, papers continued to report occasional Klan activity, but would always proclaim that where thousands had been expected, only scores gathered, and that gone are the days when the Klan could claim membership of millions, even adding that the present state of the hooded night riders cannot be described more accurately than by citing the significant modesty of the exalted Cyclops himself, who refused to permit the Bronxville Review to publish his name because he was in business in Peekskill. While many would believe this to be a victory in defeating the Klan's rule over the region, this detail reveals that, while the great organization may have been defeated, the individuals involved merely slipped back into the shadows of small-town society. Perhaps they were waiting for an opportunity to reintroduce their former strength and terror. As the economy of Peekskill and its surrounding communities continued to decline, attempts to reindustrialize the region had been met with effective local resistance from residents who wished to maintain Peekskill's small-town way of life. As a result, properties along the Hudson River and around many of the lakes in northern Westchester and southern Putnam counties remained low in value. As a last resort on making profit on otherwise unprofitable farmland, local citizens began selling large tracts of land to developers and private groups. These scenic, low-priced properties in the heartland of the Hudson Valley attracted vacationers from New York City, who began to build small communities in and around the Peekskill area to live in during the summer season. For the most part, the majority of these visitors were working-class Jewish families, living in small bungalows or shacks during the summer. In a short amount of time, the native population of Peekskill, roughly around 17,000, was outnumbered nearly 2 to 1 by a summer population of 30,000 vacationers. The mass influx of outsiders was viewed as a disruption to the routine culture of Peekskill. Commuting became more difficult. The local train station was more crowded, taking longer to board and unboard. Stores were overcrowded, and items became more difficult to find. Parking became an incredible hassle for the residents who now felt they were being pushed out of their streets by the Jewish colonists. Yet despite these frustrations, business in Peekskill had improved for the first time in decades. Money was pouring into Peekskill businesses from the summer colonies. The economy of Peekskill had now grown dependent upon the vacationers, though the majority of local residents were only seeing the inconveniences caused by the crowds.
There seems to be a great deal of resentment against the people who spend their summers in and around the vacation areas of Peekskill. One wonders whether the people who are loudest in voicing their objections to these people are aware of the great benefits derived by the merchants, citizens, and taxpayers of Peekskill. To offer resentment against these peoples is actually to bite the hand that feeds you.
During the summer, Peekskill shops saw a surge in business. But for the rest of the year, business was about the same as it was before. The result of this was an inability to keep up with the short-term demands of the summer customers. Combined with the issues of traffic, commuting, and an overwhelming sense of being unwelcome, the colonies decided to provide for themselves. One of the largest colonies in the area, the Mohegan Colony of Lake Mohegan, decided to open their own stores within the colony. Despite the concern of seasonal traffic, it proved to be successful year-round. Now the native community of Peekskill was left with the dilemma of no longer having the income from colonists shopping in town, but having to carry the tax load of a significantly larger population than they were accustomed to for the majority of the year. Since Peekskill was already struggling, this decrease in income put a greater spotlight on the cultural and political differences between the two groups.
The summer colonists were near polar opposites of the residents of Peekskill. The summer colonists tended to be more cosmopolitan, taking interest in the arts, literature, music, and theater. From the perspective of the residents of Peekskill, the summer colonists were outsiders with strange clothes, strange ideas, and money to burn. While the Peekskill area was made up of blue-collar Republicans, even being referred to as Democrat-proof by the locals, the summer colonists were mostly middle and working-class Jews with a distinctly left-wing political culture. Coming from the ghettos of New York, where similar to other immigrant and ethnic groups, they lived apart from the rest of the city in the early 20th century, communal living and collective action was at the forefront of Jewish working-class culture. This was demonstrated in the unions, as well as social and political organizations that were led by the second and third generation Jewish immigrants, who ranged from reformers to radicals.
The rise of this new left wing was coupled with the declining faith in capitalism during the Great Depression. As millions of Americans struggled to survive and make ends meet, many had become frustrated and disillusioned by the failure of the capitalist system and saw alternative ideologies as a more fruitful endeavor. From these ideologies, many unique political parties, social organizations, and cultural movements were founded. The summer colonies of Westchester and Putnam counties reflected the diverse schools of political and social thought by the representatives who resided there during the summer. Some colonies leaned more toward one ideology than another. Among the earliest of these colonies was Camp Followers of the Trail, located just south of Peekskill in the village of Buchanan. Founded in 1927, the colony strived to provide rest and relaxation for politically radical, working-class thinkers and activists. A like-minded colony, the Golden's Bridge Colony, was established in Lewisboro to be a closely knit community with an emphasis on hiking and nature. The communist influence on these two colonies was strong, with roughly half of their memberships being made up of open communists, and the other half represented by fellow travelers and other sympathetic idealists. The newspaper of choice was the Morgen Freiheit, a Yiddish newspaper based out of New York City with strong connections to the Communist Party USA. Many residents of Camp Followers of the Trail were members of leftist unions, such as the International Fur and Leather Workers Union, often recognized for being a strong, progressive force in labor strikes and other labor-related disputes during the first half of the 20th century. The Fur Workers Union was known to deploy a sort of paramilitary vanguard to defend picket lines from police violence or when other forms of civil protest were unsuccessful in achieving the fair and decent conditions sought after by workers in the garment trade. While their methods were often criticized, their successes had to be recognized, such as when a 1926 fur workers' strike ended with the first 40-hour, 5-day work week in the garment industry, along with a 10% wage increase as a direct result of the continued efforts of the Fur and Leather Workers Union. While communism helped form the vision of these two colonies, the culture of the Golden's Bridge Colony and the Followers of the Trail would reflect the struggles of many Jewish Americans in their relationship with their heritage. Membership was often split on whether to embrace or abandon their ancestral traditions. Some colony members would put on plays or sing songs in the spirit of their homeland. But other members were determined to abandon their past culture in the hopes that this would help ease the process of assimilating into American society.
I'd like to make a motion. From now on, Chairman will try to conduct meetings in English only. I need a second on the motion.
Second.
It is passed. Chairman calls on Rosenberg to stop speaking Yiddish. We're in America now, Mr. Rosenberg.
Goldensbridge Colony is very, very special to me in terms of what it gave to the children here. I grew up here from the age of 1 or 2, and I left here around 1945 when I went into the Army, and then left New York for Detroit. And Goldensbridge I've taken with me all the time. Goldensbridge was primarily a summer community, but there were 3 or 4 families that lived here all winter. I went to school here. There was my family, there were the Bookmans, and we all went to Goldensbridge. We were the winter people here. I have a lot more to say, and I don't know if I have the time or not, but just shut me up whenever you want. 1 more minute. Well, that's impossible. I object. I asked the membership for 5.
Anybody second his motion?
Cut off the mic, Jack. Actually, I was going to start off by saying Chava and Chavarim, and then I realized no Yiddish was allowed at the meeting, so I got to English.
My uncle and aunt, my Jay and Sabina Milstein, are of the original founders. And I'm really following up on Jackie Slater's beautiful tale because I was a summer child here. He was a year-round child. And I wanted to just say a few things about what it was like for a city child in the late 20s and the 30s to be coming to heaven every summer. This is really what we lived for, to come here in the summertime. The place was like one large extended family. Of course, it looked very different because the houses were shacks. The walls didn't go up to the ceilings. The doors to the room closed on hasps, not with knobs. Of course, we had outhouses. And of course, our mothers, our wonderful mothers, cooked on kerosene stoves, and we kids carried water from across the road in pails. You've heard these stories, so I won't belabor them. It's just to say that the ambiance, the milieu, the environment for these children that we were was so healthy and so loving and so caring that we grew, our youth was in the worst times of this country's century anyway. And for us, it was not the worst times. We had a wonderful youth. And it was Rena who spoke to me, and she said, yes, because we need a community. And that's what our founders gave to us, what everyone needs, this kind of supportive community.
Despite sharing many similarities in culture and heritage, other colonies in the region opposed what they considered to be the heavy-handed communist propaganda emanating from these 2 camps. A group of democratic socialists founded the 3 Arrows Cooperative in Putnam Valley, named after the insignia of the German and Austrian Social Democratic parties, displaying 3 arrows aimed against monarchism, Nazism, and communism. The Cooperative's goal was to create a country home at a proletarian price.
Is it Fan or Fan?
They call me Fan. My real name is Fan. And yeah.
Right. This is an interview with Fan or Fanny Weber in 3 Arrows in Putnam Valley, New York. And the interview is being conducted by Barbara Doyle from the Putnam Valley Historical Society. Fanny is going to talk about 3 Arrows, the early days here, and whatever else develops in this conversation.
My husband came from a country family, so he was very much interested in buying a estate somewhere in the country. And we also looked over the land and tried to choose the sites for the beginning members. And it was very unorganized, not disorganized, but unorganized. So we just shouted at each other and said, this is where we're going to settle. Where will you be? And then they were within distance so that they could yell down to us and we could yell to them. We didn't think about it. We just said, yoo-hoo. And if we could hear their voices, that was nice because we were, some of us were close friends. I had friends who were very close, so we would be very informal about that.
So, as I understand it, it was basically a group of socialists that wanted to establish this place.
I think so.
But it sounds more like it was the cooperative spirit that sort of was the thread that held it all together.
The cooperative spirit also developed in Europe as well, and was much more, I think, complex than just the ordinary spirit. It really required a lot of committee work, and planning, because what are you going to cooperate on? And the socialist part was, of course, the ideal. It was based on the fact that we believed in a society that was helpful to its members. It meant that everybody had to chip in and so on, they worked together. It was very idealistic. But there were the concepts of socialism, a lot of them which have been adopted by, of course, modern society, unemployment insurance. These programs were not in existence at the time. Medicare, that housing, that was a socialist concept.
That was so long ago, who remembers when? Not tonight to carry ice or kerosene. You older members know what we mean. 75 families, 75 families share the home. 75 families with harmony, 75 who will build free era of
The largest of all of these colonies was the Mohegan Colony. It was founded in 1923 by followers of the modern school movement, an anarchist educational movement originally from Spain. The Mohegan Modern School stressed free initiative, personal expression through art and writing, and a love of nature, and it would quickly become the most ethnically mixed and politically diverse colony in the region.
The education of our children is stunted and corrupted by a public system which has for its aim the raising of a patriotic generation of workers who will fit into the existing capitalist system. We are organizing this settlement in the hope that we may free ourselves and our children from at least some of the diseases of city life, to give free rein to our thoughts and ideals, to offer our children a libertarian education which will fit them to be fighters for a better world. We intend in our social activities within the colony to practice extreme tolerance towards the ideals and social activities of others.
Classes would take trips through nearby parks and forests to study plant life and geology, with the modern school preferring a hands-on approach to understanding nature. Poems written by the children of the school reveal an advanced understanding of reading and writing for their age.
The birches with their yellow leaves are just for an autumn dance. The maples also will be there. They got their costumes from France. I'm not so sure of the oak, because he's still a little bit green. The old north wind, he will be there. I think he's really quite mean.
Mohegan would set an example for the other colonies in the region for cooperative management of their lake, social facilities, and communal and cultural affairs. While the colony was founded by a mixed group of Jewish and non-Jewish anarchists, anarchism would not be the central ideology of Mohegan in the years after the colony's founding. The national movement was in decline, even before the Great Depression, and the Mohegan colony represented the last communitarian effort by the American branch of the modern school movement. Many of these communities were formed on the passions of leftist families desperately working to make their utopian visions come true on a small scale. The Great Depression would force many of these camps to start accepting non-members to join as renters. Older members of the camps gradually shifted to the middle of the progressive political spectrum as well, so that as new generations came to control these communities, the political and philosophical identities that had fueled their creation either faded away or became outdated over time. While politics still played a role in some of the discussions and events held within these communities, many vacationers took no interest in politics, simply looking for a quiet refuge away from the city. The unique differences between these communities, their indifference to affairs outside the colonies, and their gradual shift away from radical politics were, for the most part, completely lost on the people of Peekskill.
The town around here is very conservative. They're all Republicans. When we came here, we brought something new. We went around in halters and shorts. So the first thing they marked us as was a nudist colony. We're nudists. Once you're a nudist, you can't be a Republican. You won't be a Republican if you are a nudist. Then we were everything. If you're a nudist, you must be a communist. The worst thing they could call anybody was a communist. So naturally, they called us communists.
Now, since you were one of the first people up here, do you recall any reactions from the community to a group of urban, educated, Jewish, socialists coming into this rural area?
I wasn't aware of anything until the communists came, and some of the local people mixed up with the socialists and the communists. The socialists felt more strongly against the communists maybe than the local people, because we felt we were very democratic, and they weren't.
Now, what do you mean when the communists came? When
that I heard about. There was some kind of an eruption. I wish I could remember when this was. This really was later. There was.
That was the Robeson Riots.
Right.
Oh, that was even later.
That's much later.
Yeah.
In the minds of many in Peekskill, all vacationists were Jews, and all Jews were communists, and they were all equally worthy of suspicion. While there were a few incidents of outward anti-Semitic prejudice from the locals, exclusion was the goal for many, such as the author of a 1930s brochure advertising a trolley running from Peekskill to Yorktown Heights, proclaiming no Hebrews were to be permitted on board. But despite these examples of animosity, the majority of Peekskill's full-year residents paid little attention to these groups, since they, for the most part, kept to themselves, and had not attempted to influence local thinking. However, this changed at the conclusion of the Second World War.
In the months before the Nazi regime's collapse in 1945, forces within the American and Soviet governments were working tirelessly to ensure they controlled as much territory in Europe before the other nation could dominate the continent. When the Soviet and American armies met and the fighting ceased, a border would immediately be formed between the Soviet-controlled Eastern Bloc and the NATO-aligned Western nations, with Germany and the city of Berlin being split in half. In a speech delivered by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the creation of this divide had cast the eastern half of the continent behind an iron curtain that would not only erase the freedoms of those nations trapped within Soviet control, but could jeopardize the rest of the continent if Soviet expansion was allowed to continue. This was happening in real time in Greece, which was engaged in a civil war against a communist-backed rebellion. Europe, already devastated by 6 years of the deadliest fighting in recorded history, was on the verge of economic collapse. If this was to happen, it would bring America back into the economic depression from which it had just managed to crawl out of during the war. But it would take a great deal of convincing to make the American people support any foreign intervention in the economic and social affairs of Europe so soon after the conflict's end.
Harry Truman assumed the office of the presidency following the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt, who had been president for 4 terms, had helped bring the United States out of one of the worst economic depressions in its history through numerous experiments in enlarging and expanding the role of the federal government through the New Deal. Agencies such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Social Security Administration, the Federal Housing Administration, and the Works Progress Administration, among others, were created to help meet the challenges of the era in ways the federal government in its original state simply could not. While many of these efforts would eventually be successful, Republicans would become wary that the 50% expansion of the federal government in just 5 years, alongside an influx of left-wing progressive intellectuals governing secretive and powerful agencies such as the Office of Scientific Research and eventually the Atomic Energy Commission, was a sign that communism was now deep within our government. This led to the creation of the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1938 to discredit the administration's programs as communistic. Despite these concerns, the results of FDR's success was difficult to ignore. So while his decisions were criticized and disliked, it was nearly impossible to stop him. But after his passing, Truman, also a Democrat, now had the difficult task of inheriting all of Roosevelt's work, as well as all of Roosevelt's detractors, all while not having Roosevelt's string of successes to keep him afloat. Now more than ever, the administration was targeted by Republican critics for permitting internal communist subversion to take place. So Truman decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He green-lighted the fear-mongering of communists within America in order to create a distrust of the ideology among the population. This would please the Republicans who had just become a majority in both the Senate and the House of Representatives in the election of 1946, as well as gain support for his foreign policy efforts to bring aid to Europe in the post-war years. This culminated in the resurrection of the House Un-American Activities Committee as a standing committee.
Suspicion of internal subversion was not completely unfounded. The Office of Strategic Services raided the offices of the magazine Amerasia, who had criticized the administration's aid to Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek, who was battling the communist-backed revolution led by Mao Zedong. Thousands of classified documents were obtained from the Navy, War, and State Departments, leading to the arrest of 6 people, 3 of whom were government employees of the State Department and Office of Naval Intelligence. A startling revelation shocked Americans when 2 former Communist Party members, claiming to be Soviet agents, approached the FBI with evidence of Soviet espionage within the federal government. The trials surrounding those accused, whether guilty of their crimes or not, would have the desired outcome for the Truman administration. The growing culture of anti-communism could be seen across the cultural landscape via radio, movies, and magazines. The Truman administration used this moment to introduce the Marshall Plan, named for Secretary of State George Marshall. Providing billions of dollars in American aid to war-torn nations in Europe, the administration's goal was to prevent poverty, hunger, and economic distress in an effort to prevent another depression, as well as to push back communist expansion. Around the same time, Truman would deliver a speech before a joint session in Congress. This speech outlined the principles of the Truman Doctrine, otherwise known as containment, an initiative that would mark a turning point in American foreign policy. It would also be a turning point for American culture.
Greece must have assistance if it is to become a self-supporting and self-respecting democracy. The United States must supply this assistance. One of the primary objectives of the foreign policy of the United States is the creation of conditions in which we and other nations will be able to work out a way of life free from coercion. This is no more than a frank recognition that totalitarian regimes imposed upon free peoples by direct or indirect aggression undermine the foundations of international peace and hence the security of the United States. Should we fail to aid Greece and Turkey in this fateful hour, the effect will be far-reaching to the West as well as to the East. We must take immediate and resolute action.
10 days after the Truman Doctrine was delivered, the president drafted Executive Order 9835, which established a permanent employee loyalty program. While this was initially considered to be another olive branch to please the Republicans who feared internal communist activities, it also gave the Attorney General, Tom C. Clark, the power to compile a list of organizations deemed totalitarian, fascist, communist, or subversive. Clark would be the sole arbiter in deciding which organizations met the qualifications to be included on this list, with no restrictions and no procedures of determining the veracity of the Attorney General's claims. As a result, anyone who was deemed to be a threat, critic, or simply opposed the administration were now deemed to be subversive and therefore a threat to internal security by being disloyal to the country at a time of national crisis. Whether they were genuinely disloyal or not was irrelevant, as the list was then published for all Americans to see, and with the growing culture of anti-communism in the United States, organizations included on the list would face repercussions from mainstream society. The Connecticut State Youth Conference, for instance, criticized American intervention in Greece in 1947, and when Attorney General Clark included the conference on his list, they found that the Hartford Hotel, which they were planning on using for their event, was no longer available. Many other organizations would be included on the list, and those associated would see their everyday lives change drastically overnight. One organization in particular was the Civil Rights Congress. Formed in 1946 by William Patterson to combat racial hatred, as well as promote the advancement of civil rights of oppressed groups in the United States, they also defended other leftist organizations who were targeted for their so-called subversive activities. Figures associated with the Civil Rights Congress would suddenly become disgraced, blacklisted, or subjected to surveillance to ensure that they were not disloyal. These individuals included William Patterson, actress and singer Lena Horne, and Paul Robeson. Paul had become vice president of the Civil Rights Congress and was a vocal opponent of Truman's policies. The lynching of 4 African Americans in Georgia during the summer of 1946 prompted Robeson to meet with Truman and convince him to enact legislation to end lynching, stating that if the president did not act to end this practice, blacks would be forced to defend themselves.
People will so fight for their freedom that if it is not given to them, they will take it. The time has come when we must have our freedom, not any 100 years, not any 50 years, not any 10 years, now.
I am today giving up my concerts for 2 or 3 years to enter into this struggle at a very, what I call getting into the rank and file struggle of my people for full citizenship in these United States. So I won't be singing, except for the rights of my people for the next couple of years. No pretty songs, gentlemen. No pretty songs. Time for some full citizenship. Understandable?
Truman ended the meeting, claiming that it was not the right time to introduce a federal bill to make lynching illegal. At the same time, Robeson's stance on trade unionism being a crucial element to the advancement of civil rights had brought him into circles with Communist Party members. And these affiliations, combined with his placement on the Attorney General's list of subversive persons for his membership with the Civil Rights Congress, turned Robeson from a beloved celebrity into a controversial figure. As a result, he would be summoned before the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1948 and questioned on his affiliation with the Communist Party.
Let's get down to some of the facts in the bill. Now, I asked you the question you said you'd answered. Are you an American communist?
Today, Senator Ferguson, that question has become the very basis of the struggle for American civil liberties. 19 or more, and many of some of the most brilliant and distinguished Americans are about to go to jail for failure to answer that question, and I'm going to join them if necessary. I refuse to answer the question.
You refuse to answer.
This is an invasion of my right of secret ballot, Senator Ferguson. If you want to know whether I am the Communist Party is a legal party, like the Democratic Party, Republican Party, I'm going to vote pretty soon. If you want to send some government official to take my ballot away, a secret ballot, my constitutional right, he can see just what I am.
I see. Have you a communist card in any communist organization, any state, Mr. Robeson?
That is, I consider it part of the other question that I refuse to answer.
Yeah, I see. That's what I want to
get
at.
I don't. Maybe if I were a Republican, maybe I wouldn't disclose it either. I would say, come to the ballot box and see it. I'm not interested in what the Republicans do. All I know, the Communist Party is a legal party in the United States, and making a magnificent struggle on many fronts.
I mean, communists just refuse to disclose whether they're members of it.
Well, I say since you've because today you have made this goes to the very heart of the bill. I say that this whole hysteria, and the bill is a part of that hysteria, to use this not only to break, not to hurt communists, but really to break the civil liberties of every section of the American people. The rights of labor, the rights of liberals. This is what I consider. This is a very basic.
You know something about the communists of America. You know something about the communists of America.
Many dear friends.
Yes,
it's perfectly true.
And you know.
I think they've done a magnificent job.
But you think they've done a magnificent job in America. That's your opinion.
That's all right.
And do you know that it is a fact that they, outside of their membership, decline to disclose that they are communists?
Well, I think that they might be. This can be determined. The Supreme Court's going to have to rule on that.
But no, isn't that a fact that, except among themselves, they decline to make it public that they are communist or not communist?
I would say that if it weren't a basic problem of civil liberties, it goes to the very heart of the struggle, in which the denial of these civil liberties, of which I believe this bill to be a part. That's the reason I'm here. This would not be so at all.
This did not deter Paul, but it became more difficult to find venues willing to have him perform. In Peoria, Illinois, the mayor refused to allow the Shrine Mosque for a performance. A week later, in Albany, New York, the Board of Education attempted to prevent a Robeson concert from taking place at the urging of the mayor. By the end of 1948, 85 of his concerts scheduled for the following year had been canceled. This forced Paul to travel overseas to continue performing. While touring through Europe in 1949, Robeson attended the World Peace Congress in Paris. Other attendees included W.E.B. Du Bois, Pablo Picasso, Louis Aragon, and J.D. Bernal. Paul was asked to speak on behalf of the thousands of Third World delegates who wanted him to express their desire for independence from colonialism and for world peace.
We in America do not forget that it is on the backs of the poor whites of Europe and on the backs of millions of black people the wealth of America has been acquired. And we are resolved that it shall be distributed in an equitable manner among all of our children. And we don't want any hysterical stupidity about our participating in a war against anybody, no matter whom. We are determined to fight for peace. We do not wish to fight the Soviet Union.
This impromptu speech would become the most controversial moment of his entire career. Before Robeson even took the stage, reporters from the Associated Press and other media outlets had already transcribed and dispatched his supposed words.
Mr. Robeson told the Congress that American Negroes never would fight the Soviet Union. It is unthinkable, said Mr. Robeson, that American Negroes would go to war on behalf of those who have oppressed them for generations against a country which in one generation has raised their people to the full dignity of mankind.
Robeson later claimed he had not spoken the words the Associated Press dispatch ascribed to him, later reprinted by the New York Times and other papers. This supposed speech, at a conference which the New York Times described as a communist-sponsored meeting, was the last straw for many American citizens. Robeson was now branded as a traitor, an individual antagonistic to his own country and a complete devotee to the interests of the Soviet Union. This speech was even too much for many black supporters of Robeson, who in an effort to survive the incoming typhoon of backlash disassociated themselves from him,
not wanting the struggle for civil rights to be hindered by a subversive individual. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr., a congressman representing New York's 22nd Congressional District, stated that by no stretch of the imagination was Paul Robeson qualified to speak for all black citizens in the United States. In an attempt to discredit Robeson's influence in the black community, the House Un-American Activities Committee pressured prominent black figures in the United States to challenge Robeson's ability to speak on behalf of all African Americans.
Baseball's top hitter and star second baseman of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Jackie Robinson, comes to bat for Uncle Sam to refute Paul Robeson's remark that U.S. Negroes would not fight in a war against Russia.
I'm on my way to Washington to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. That's all I can say at this time. I'll make further statements from Washington.
Robinson is the last witness to testify concerning the loyalty of the members of his race. And before the committee, he reads his own prepared statement.
I've been asked to express my views on Paul Robeson's statements in Paris to the effect that American Negroes would refuse to fight in any war against Russia because we love Russia so much. I haven't any comment to make except that, on that statement, except that if Mr. Robeson actually made it, it sounds very silly to me. And most Negroes and Italians and Irish and Jews and Swedes and Slavs and other Americans would act just as all these groups did in the last war. They'd do their best to keep their country out of war. If unsuccessful, they'd do their best to help their country win the war against Russia or any other enemy that threatened us.
Although he never regretted the content of his statement made before the House Un-American Activities Committee, Jackie Robinson, disillusioned in his final years, recognized that he was used by elements of white America as a means of discrediting and silencing Paul Robeson. As American society continued to push Paul Robeson out of the mainstream, those who knew his passion and commitment to activism did what they could to stand by him. In August of 1949, a theatrical agency based in New York called People's Artists Incorporated announced a Paul Robeson concert for the summer colonies outside of Peekskill. All proceeds would go to a group Robeson was still closely connected with, the Harlem chapter of the Civil Rights Congress. The concert was scheduled for Saturday, August 27, 1949.